The war between Iran and the United States is now entering a far more dangerous phase because Tehran is sending a clear message there will be no negotiations with Washington or Donald Trump. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has made it clear that Tehran sees no reason to negotiate with Washington at this stage. According to him, the United States launched what he calls a war of choice and failed to achieve its objectives of a quick and decisive victory. Araghchi says Washington is now searching for a so-called Plan B, but Tehran believes that it will fail as well. Iran is also accusing the United States of attacking even while negotiations were underway in the past. Because of that, Tehran now says that there is no request from its side for a ceasefire and no interest in negotiating with Washington at this stage. Iran is signaling that it is preparing for a prolonged confrontation rather than a quick diplomatic exit. These exact comments are also being echoed by senior Iranian officials. At the Raisina dialogue in New Delhi, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister, Saeed, Khatibzadeh, accused the United States of attempting to end Iran's existence and warned that Tehran will respond by pushing American military presence out of the Persian Gulf region. According to him, Iran is defending itself and diplomacy can only return if what he calls aggression stops first.
American has decided to put an end to the existence of Iran. Israelis have been promising this for many decades because of their delusion about greater Israel. The other side has started an act of aggression against us. So the ball is in the room of who has started the aggression. If they stop today the aggression, we are defending, we are not on offense. So it is very much quite clear if they want to stop this atrocity today, those who have started the attack, they can do that.
But the messaging from Washington looks very different. United States President Donald Trump claims that Iran is privately seeking a deal even as the conflict escalates. Trump says American strikes are systematically destroying Iran's missile and drone capabilities and claim that much of Iran's naval fleet has already been wiped out in just a few days. At the same time, Trump says a full-ground invasion of Iran would be a waste of time, even while acknowledging that the conflict could turn into a long war. Washington appears to be focusing instead on sustained military pressure rather than boots on the ground.
The United States military, together with the wonderful Israeli partners, continues to totally demolish the enemy far ahead of schedule and at levels that people have never seen before, actually. We're destroying more of Iran's missiles and drone capability every single hour, knocking them out like nobody thought was possible. As soon as they set off a missile, within 4 minutes, the launcher gets hit. They don't know what's happening. But we have the greatest military anywhere in the world. Their Navy is gone. 24 ships in 3 days. That's a lot of ships. Their anti-aircraft weapons are gone. So they have no air force. They have no air defense. They're calling. They're saying, how do we make a deal? I said, you're being a little bit late. And we want to fight now more than they do. And I'm once again calling on all members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the military and the police, to lay down their arms. They're only going to be killed.
And there is another dimension quietly emerging in the background. Reports suggest that the Kurdish rebel groups inside Iran may be preparing for activity along the border, and there have been long-standing allegations that the CIA has previously supplied limited weapons to some Iranian Kurdish factions as part of covert pressure against Tehran. If that front intensifies, it could open a new internal security challenge for Iran even as the external war continues. Washington has never publicly confirmed such operations, but the possibility of insurgent activity inside Iran could complicate the battlefield significantly. So the signals are clear. Iran says it will not negotiate. The United States says it will keep striking, and new proxy fronts could emerge inside Iran itself. The question tonight is simple but critical. Are we now looking at a prolonged war between Iran and the United States of America? And how far could this conflict expand across the region? Now let me open up this conversation with my panel. I'm joined by Professor Scott Lucas from Clinton Institute, University College of Dublin. Thank you so much, sir. Major General Sudhakar ji, it's a pleasure to have you again, sir, and Professor Swaran Singh of JNU. Now, Let me straight away go to Professor Scott Lucas first. Iran saying very categorically no. Why?
Well, because the regime is fighting for its survival. There are differences here. Israel wants full-out regime change. Every official connected, military, political, clerical, they want them gone. Although Israel is not clear on, who would replace them. The Trump team, on the other hand, does not want regime change, but they want regime capitulation. They want Iran to give up once and for all its entire nuclear program, civilian as well as military. They want Iran to sharply limit, maybe give up their ballistic missiles, and they want Iran to limit or break ties with allies in the Middle East, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq. The regime is not ready to concede on those conditions at this point. So we cannot get back to the position where we were only 8 days ago when you did have talks between the US and Iran in Geneva. Now there is a mediation effort going on, or an attempted mediation effort. My understanding is it's being led by Qatar, which of course is one of the Gulf states threatened by Iranian retaliation, but they were rebuffed by US officials earlier this week. The Trump folks said, we're not in a position where we want to sit down with the regime. President Pezeshkian this morning actually referred to that mediation effort without naming Qatar, but he said the mediation has to be with the US and Israel. In other words, the US and Israel have to show signs of stepping back before the regime will come to the table.
Do you think that this present dispensation in its present form will have a conversation with the United States of America, or do you think that they will exact more revenge in terms of pain points by attacking LNG factories, or the oil installations or water salination, attacking those pain points, or for example data centers, cloud centers?
The reason why they're hitting those positions in the Gulf states is to say to the Gulf states, look, you need to get the Trump folks to distance themselves from Israel and pull back. Otherwise, you're going to suffer the pain from this. Remember that in June of 2025, the way the 12-day Israeli war ended is that Iran launched a demonstration strike on the largest American base in the Middle East in Qatar, but they told the Americans, evacuate your troops. They then used Qatar to say to Washington, look, we told you to evacuate. We're playing fair. Donald Trump accepted that message, and that's when he told Benjamin Netanyahu to cease fire. The regime is hoping the same thing could happen this time, but there's no sign yet that the Trump camp is willing to say, okay, we've done enough. We'll make Israel stop.
Okay, so Araghchi, what is your assessment now with this conversation that took place today, where the topmost guy says no talks with the United States of America, then there is second signaling that is taking place that Qatar may intervene, but what is your assessment of this war?
Good evening, Karthikeya. Thank you for inviting me for your show. It's a very, not hot topic, it's a very sensitive, serious, and substantive topic, because the real solution lies here only. As I look at it, with due respect to our very distinguished and esteemed co-panelists, my perspective on the whole issue is that United States of America will do well to select the objective first. What is the objective? Is the objective to change the regime, or to prevent Iran from going nuclear, or to stop its developing or going full hog about the ballistic missiles, and likewise? What is the objective? I don't think USA has applied itself and carried out the selection of objective in a professional manner, because when you select the objective, one needs to see, that is the end state I'm talking of, then you got to see the means and methods. Do they have the means and methods? Simply blindly following the Libyan model, which was undertaken in 2011, is not going to work in case of Iran. Iran is a much bigger and larger, with a greater population, educated population, than that what Libya had. So, and Libya's circumstances, if you allow me, let me just very quickly reflect on important issues. The most important thing as a military man is that the military of Libya had started supporting the rebel forces. It is the rebel forces, then they went in, and then the assassination or execution of Gaddafi took place. Here, the military force has been lambasting, they have been going on retaliating for past 6, 7 days in full hog, full might. That is the first distinction. Second distinction that comes to my mind is the rebel forces way back in Libya in 2011, they were against the Gaddafi government. So here you find the population. I was listening to your interview of film actress Mandana something. She gave a
Mandana
perspective
Karimi.
with this. Yes, I quite admire this. There is a change in attitude in Iran. They also want to democratize, but that is going to take a long time. Look at there was a time period in Iran where the population in rural areas used to be around close to 36 to 40%. Now population in the rural areas has come down to 23 to 27%. Okay, and the urban area population has gone up to almost close to 73, 74%. So what does it mean? People in the urban areas, they are more educated. Employment may not be those many, but the awareness level is pretty good. The attitude is changing. The way of life is different. So the rural people who are totally kept well away from the latest social media networking and the information overload that you and me keep talking of, they are well away from that. So people who do not know anything, they will definitely go in favor of the regime. So you have a good sitting people, 27%, you can blindly put them. I heard the lady saying 20% people who support. It's not 20, it is 20, close to 27% who are in favor of the regime. The people who are opposing the regime are 79% or 77% or 73%, let's say. And out of that also there are two groups. Now what has happened after this external force attack on 28th of February, the way it was conducted, despite the fact that the diplomacy and negotiation had reached a very advanced stage of final solution, despite all that, an attack like this, and also
Okay.
alongside you had the girl students in a school dying as many as 170. Today the figure is saying 180. The volleyball team, where the women volleyballers were there or some basketballers, there 10 or 20 of them also were knocked off. So followed by a ship which was sailing from India in the backwaters of India, or say almost about 200 nautical miles or more than that from Indian coastline in the international water, when they had no weapon, nothing to defend themselves, and they have been actually destroyed with
But you
the help
see,
of the government.
you're absolutely right. But what is even more worrisome is the statements that have come from Qatar. Professor Swaran Singh, the Energy Minister of Qatar, says that this war has the potential to destabilize global economies, and he went on record in an interview given to one of the papers from London. He said that the Brent, the crude, can touch $150 a barrel if this does not come to an end.
That's absolutely the fear indeed, if the war continues for a longer period of time. And I think this desperation is driven by these countries primarily because energy exports is the virtually only source of their national earnings, other than little bit of tourism and some financial services and so on, or maybe American bases there. So it's partly driven by their own paranoia as to what happens to their economies, and therefore, of course, it is clearly going to have a major impact on global economy. All commodity prices are going to go up, airlines are diverting, shipping is not happening, and so on. That's true. But it's also significant to understand as to how can we imagine some kind of negotiations taking place. Both sides expectedly will present a very, very robust, very, very aggressive posturing, and that's what is happening. Both sides are saying we don't want to negotiate. But its possibility is that somewhere in the, behind the curtain, a possibility of some initiatives like Scott mentioned, Qatar may be trying, so that until that goes on for a couple of weeks and they develop enough confidence that they can now move to negotiations, this bravados and these mutual attacks are likely to continue. And that is partly because in this case, it is not any confusion as to who started it. In fact, that is why Iran finds it extremely difficult to publicly give any indication of willingness to negotiate, because the supreme leader, imagine emotional connect that at least the ruling regime and its beneficiaries would have of the supreme leader being assassinated, if you want to use that word, along with a large number of about 40, 45 other senior leaders of the regime. And they cannot be seen negotiating, because that will be seen equal to surrender. And they also understand that this attack happened whereas negotiations were indicating good progress. We were saying they are about to clinch a deal and so on. So it looks to Iran as if a camouflage to actually plan an attack on Iran. And Iranians also believed it is the United States who happily walked out of JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action Agreement, that had been brought together in 2015 by about, I think, 5 or 6 years of work behind it.
Correct.
And in that sense, now IGRC being in control, they are going to promote this aggressive posturing for a period of time until they are very sure that negotiations can actually be sincere and serious and can deliver something to them. Basically, that drift will also depend on their own calculations of stability of the regime. And if you're mentioning Kurdistan movement could come up again and Kurds could create some internal trouble.
That is something. Professor Soren Singh, I'm keeping it for the latter part, because that is one aspect, that by arming Kurdistan, it's not only about Iran, it's also about Turkey, it's also about Iraq. They are spread all over, the map of West Asia as a product of the Sykes-Picot Accord. People who never went to West Asia, they divided. It's like McMahon Line, Durand Line. This is a colonial legacy. The Iraq was born, so came the Jordan, so came the Saudi Arabia. These were not the countries or nationalities. They were created through cartographers of the Raj, But, I'll come to it later. But the fact of the matter is, whenever America has conducted these wars in the name of freedom and democracies, we had seen long spells of migration, displacement, or return of ideologies in a very in a stronger avatar, like Afghanistan, or for example Iraq. It saw the emergence of Muqtada Sadr suddenly, or for example Syria. I'm not in favor of Assad. He is a dynast, but it was like mixed North Korea. But who has come to power in Syria? A former Taliban commander. Al Qaeda commander is ruling Syria. So look at the repercussions of the intervention. Intervention has created, to quote Franz Fanon, its own vicious and violent circle of violence which never ends. Professor Scott Lucas, how dangerous is this idea of playing with the sentiments of the Kurds, that they are not an ethnicity, they can reclaim themselves? And imagine if entire thing gets armed, it affects Turkey, it affects Iraq, it affects pockets of population in Syria, though they are not contiguous in terms of geography, and it even affects Iran.
First, we already have an uncontained war. This is not just in Iran. This is across the region. Look at Israel's attacks on Beirut this morning. Secondly, I think the General G put it quite right. He said, look, what are your objectives here? But there's also the question of what is your plan to achieve those objectives? And the Trump administration doesn't have a plan B after the airstrikes and the bombing. So what do they do now? They say, okay, well, we've been training, we've been arming these Iranian Kurdish fighters. And the Kurdish population of Western Iran has legitimate grievances against the regime. They have been repressed for decades. But to simply say you're going to send these fighters back across the border into Iran, they're going to stir up an uprising. Even if that uprising succeeded and was not crushed by the regime's military, the regime is still in power in Tehran. It's still in power in the rest of the country. So what you have is the risk that you have the fragmentation of Iraq and that you have further instability and turmoil. It's not going to be exactly like Iraq in 2003, but we saw what happened there. With the fall of Saddam Hussein, it didn't bring a unified country. And I'll just remind your viewers, the U.S. has tried this before. Back in 1991, they encouraged the Kurds in northern Iraq to rise up against the Saddam Hussein regime. But when the Bush administration decided that Saddam Hussein would stay, they weren't going to try to replace the regime, they abandoned the Kurds and they were cut down. So you have that risk here, because remember, I said the Trump folks are not going for regime change. They're going for regime surrender. So they could allow the regime to stay in place in Tehran, and that would make the Kurds vulnerable, even if they succeeded in the immediate goal of getting some type of local autonomy.
Sudhakarji, do you think that this war can reshape the boundaries, actual boundaries on ground?
No, that's not possible
Not
because
possible.
you take the examples in the neighboring countries. Iraq has successfully managed to give autonomous status to the Kurds, and we are aware of the fact that they have got about 8 million, 5.6 to 8 million Kurds. Syria, of late, USA has already given a stimulus, kind of a beginning has been made. Their language has been accepted in the being considered to be accepted and included in the constitution. They are being identified and being included as an entity. That's a big thing in a country like Syria. So, in the backdrop of this, I tend to agree with Professor Scott what he said. This method has been tried out in 1991, and how much will it succeed in a country like Iran is just a matter of time. It will start manifesting in very ugly form. I visualize that any kind of upsurge or kind of a agitation to actually build up and use some resource within the boundaries of Iraq to change their mindset and use it as a proxy against the present architecture of the regime is going to take anything between 2 to 3 years. It's not that easy. Yes, CIA has been operating. I'm aware of the fact they have been arming them, they have been training them, they are trying to mobilize them, but it's not an easy ball game.
I got to ask this question to you, sir. You can't trust Donald Trump, but when he says that he doesn't have any timelines, I mean to say, does he really mean it or he doesn't really mean it? I mean to say, the fact he said the President of the United States of America is saying that he doesn't have timelines when it comes to Iran.
He doesn't have. If this question is actually meant for me, I would say he doesn't have. He hasn't understood firstly, he doesn't listen. He's not a good listener. He's a good president, maybe from his side, but to be a good leader of a superpower, he has to be a very active listener. He's not. He's not. Even his advisors are very, very immature, irresponsible. I don't think they're giving the right advice. It is going to actually trigger a kind of unending, eternal kind of a proxy war. For all you know, Kartike, maybe you may have to invite me, Professor Scott and Saran Singh, for another debate. I only hope we are not walking into a second Vietnam. Back to you, Kartike.
Second Vietnam, is that correct, Professor Swaran Singh? That can this Iran war turn into a second Vietnam for United States of America?
I think emotionally, President Trump is not ready to repeat Afghanistan, and that was very clear from his various initial remarks that he didn't want to put boots on ground. He will only use economic leverages. But here we see this unusual, sort of turnaround after he did not get the Nobel Peace Prize. He said, I am no longer committed to peace. And now we have this Venezuela and we have now Iran. His estimate was that the first very significant strike, which was very successful, it killed large number of very senior people, including the supreme leader. He thought, as you have mentioned many times in your program, that Iran would capitulate, and that did not happen. And in that sense, the war is continuing, and obviously, he doesn't have a clear idea as to how to.
And Iran is doing everything to provoke. They have started to use even cluster bombs. It's not as if the Iran is not crossing those red lines. They are using cluster bombs. They cannot be intercepted like that.
I think some of these arguments being made in media about, and Americans saying we have destroyed this percentage, that percentage of Iran's weapons. No war in human history, and General would vouch me, has ever ended because weapons got finished or something like that.
Absolutely.
Wars end only either there's an internal sabotage or there's a capitulation of a regime, or there is an unusual situation of enormous asymmetry and brutal use of force. Even that sometimes doesn't deliver. So Iran is not likely to, sort of raise hand and say, I'm sorry, I'm willing to surrender to your terms and conditions, which is not likely. And Kurds is an interesting case. I mean, the attention to Kurds is also significant. I think estimates are as much as 45 million people who think they are Kurds. And, Jews by comparison that have been focus of entire, ethnicity should get, or religious identity should get a nationhood, is about 16 million people. And when we talk of democratizing Iran, I find it also sometimes very interesting because Iran is not the worst case of democracy in that region itself. they do have Majlis and president going for elections every 4 years. I understand people are unhappy, and therefore at the beginning of the year, the protest nationwide showcased that people are generally very unhappy with the regime, partly because of half a century of sanctions and so on, but nevertheless, people are unhappy. But then they have that mechanism of going through elections. All nations have, issues with the elections itself. But, Trump today is saying he wants to have a say in who becomes the next, Shia cleric to become the supreme
that's
leader.
megalomania, sir.
Is a very, it's a dangerous, proposition to think of.
Okay, let me ask this
So in
question
that
to you.
sense,
Do you
I
think,
don't
do you think, sir, that the Sunni kingdoms, the non-Shia states, do you think that they can build pressure on Donald Trump? Can the pressure come from those who are being bombed 24/7 by Iran? Qatar,
I think
Bahrain,
beyond a
UAE,
point,
Saudi Arabia, or they will not?
there is there is already a sense of paranoia and to some amount discomfiture with the fact that they are being bombed by Iranians, and Americans are not able to help it. And Keir Starmer said, I have sent 4 fighter jets to Qatar, and it can be also used by Bahrain against incoming missiles. I fail to understand that. I'm not a military man. I'm a common man as far as military technology is concerned. The regimes here are increasingly becoming aware of limitations of depending on United States in that sense. And if it continues a couple of more weeks and energy exports come to a halt, they are going to beg or pressurize whichever way they can to American regime. And United States is already receiving very unusual kind of the response from Great Britain, United Kingdom, from Spain. He's breaking ties with Spain. Turkey, his own house in order is having its own chinks in the armor in that sense. Domestically also there are issues in United States increasingly. So yes, if war continues to be longer, the only source of earnings for these regimes, I'm not saying nations, these regimes in Middle East is export of energy. And if that doesn't happen, they will soon get into paranoia, into desperation, and they will have to do something to make sure war comes to an end, whichever way it takes.
Either there is common sense or someone does something stupid and the war escalates. That is what happens if you look at the First World War, if you look at the Second World War, or if you study the history of war, one stupid thing and it escalates out of control. Professor Scott Lucas, there's a Ukrainian war which is also happening. This is a truly global war. I was reading a report that the pinpoint attack on various military installations by Iranians was a result of the high-tech Russian intelligence given to them. So this is truly a global war. China is testing weapons, Russia is giving them intelligence. Globally things are happening in the Iranian theater.
Yeah, we've said this about the Ukraine-Russia war over the past more than 4 years, that it's global in different ways. And what you're seeing here is that no one is immune from the damage or the repercussions. That includes India, by the way. It works out in strange ways. We need to verify that report from U.S. officials that Russia has given targeting information to the Iranians about the location, including of U.S. warships and U.S. warplanes. Is that U.S. disinformation or is it legitimate? But the fact that Russia could be doing that is in play here. But let me also give you a couple of other things that are happening here. Ukraine, because there is this rallying around to defend the countries facing Iranian retaliation, not just the Gulf states, but Turkey, Cyprus. Now Ukraine has an advantage of saying, we can give you our drone interceptors that we've developed to defend against Russia. We can help you, but you need to back our security. So they can use that as a lever with the United States. But of course, what has the United States done with India in the past 24 hours? We'll give you a 30-day waiver from the punishing tariffs and the sanctions over your buying of Russian oil, which of course gives a lifeline to Vladimir Putin in terms of revenues if India takes up that. So, I think the general and the professor have both put it quite well. There is no such thing as a clean conflict. There's no such thing as a conflict which starts from point A, goes to point B, and is ended that easily. What happens is you have repercussions, twists, and consequences all along the way, and that does include South Asia as well as what happens inside Iran.
No, absolutely. I mean, so Pakistan has manufactured a war for itself in Afghanistan, very rightly said. And I'll take the closing statement from General Sudhakarji. I mean, so the reports are not good. The reports we are getting is there's a massive deployment which is taking place on the Durand line, sir.
Absolutely. Kartikeya, till yesterday evening, there were 32 countries who either had been targeted or willy-nilly they had come into the conflict. The conflict, sphere of conflict had expanded to include the Indian Ocean region. The military capability, when you compare, we all know that Iran is no match before the USA and Israel combined. But look at the what do you call the proxy or the asymmetric capability that Iran has. The asymmetric capability, many of us may not be aware. Do you now know that the surge capability of manufacturing drones, kamikaze drones, I'm talking about Shahid 316 or 136, whatever you call it, is 400 drones per day. In a month, they go on to produce something 12,000 drones. And cost of one drone is $20,000. And to negate or neutralize one drone fired by Iran, USA or Israel has to fire one either interceptor, which is costing 4 million. And with one interceptor, you cannot neutralize the drone. You have to fire minimum 2 to 3. So 12 millions to 20,000. Look at the kind of disproportionate.
America spent $1.9 billion on the first day itself.